Hello, everybody. Welcome to the unnamed review show. We have about three names that are floating around, but I think Steve and I just settled on late seating. So this is
Yes.
a late seating review of this year's Godzilla. I'm Jason Harding. I'm the acting mayor of Opinion-Ville, and with me is Steve Shives of Steve Likes to Curse.
Hi, everybody.
And for those of you who have not seen the film and are planning on seeing it, don't watch this review because I am lousy at editing out spoilers, and quite honestly, I don't want to chop this thing up into spoiler and then spoiler free. Um, so if you don't mind finding out what goes on in the movie, that's great. If you do mind, then I'm going to post this later on, edited, so that you'll be able to watch it afterwards and then vehemently disagree with both of us. So I think what we should probably just do first off is just do a basic plot synopsis of the movie. A giant lizard fights other monsters. That's it.
That about
I mean,
covers it. Huh?
that just about covers it. There's some stuff about people somewhere in there,
Yeah.
but that's about it. If you've seen a Godzilla movie,
Exactly.
it pretty much covers all the bases. If you haven't seen a Godzilla movie, essentially there's monsters that pop up. They wreak havoc of one type or another. The military has a very bad idea of how to destroy them that ultimately fails, and then Godzilla comes up and saves the day. And that's it. So now let's start the actual review of the film. And Steve, why don't you go ahead and start?
Well, I gotta say, I didn't actually get to see the movie until this past Thursday, so I haven't been biting my tongue as long as you have. But uh, ever since I saw it, I've been like dying to I've been waiting for this because I knew we were going to do this, and man, this movie just made me happy.
Yeah.
I just love this movie so much. I mean, we'll talk about it and get into more details about things we liked and didn't like about it. But my overall impression is I just love this movie.
Mm-hmm.
It made me feel so happy. I was literally beaming in the theater during the final fight when he finally like takes out the Mutos,
Mm-hmm.
the rival
The
monsters.
massive
I was
underground terrestrial,
yes,
whatever the O stand, organism.
organisms,
Thank you.
organisms. Yeah, that just I was like it was like I was 8 years old again. You know,
Yeah.
it was amazing. I loved it.
Now your background with Godzilla is you've been a Lifetime fan?
Pretty much, yeah. I used to watch it. I watched it when I would stay at my grandparents' house. They had Godzilla tapes for me. My grandmother,
Oh,
yeah, my grandmother introduced me to it, and the first one I saw, and still in my heart, my favorite, even though it's not one of the more critically acclaimed ones, is Godzilla versus Megalon.
oh, that was
Uh,
just on right before I
yeah,
came in here.
yeah. I love Godzilla versus Megalon, and I love all the Godzilla movies
Hmm.
for different reasons. And yeah, it's something I associate very much with my youth and my childhood, and and this movie really, I feel like it did right by it.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. I saw this opening night. I saw it in 3D HD. And I've been a Godzilla fan as well since I was a child, and this was before them VCR contraptions that you youngsters got. And the only time that I got to see Godzilla was it was the 3:30 movie. They would have a week of Godzilla films. You know, they'd have like the Planet of the Apes films would play all week at 3:30, and then they would do a week of Godzilla films, or you'd catch it like the Saturday Night Late movie, or it would be Creature Features, which was the horror movie night on
Yeah.
Saturday night. And then we had a weekday show that was produced locally called Captain Cosmic that would show Godzilla films every once in a while. And I that's when I really became a fan when I was a kid. And I'll have to tell you, when I watched this movie, I was feeling pretty much the same thing. Now, here's a caveat: the local college that we have here has a gigantic Japanese foreign exchange student population. Um, and when I went in there, I thought, oh, no one's going to be in there. The audience that I was with was largely Japanese students who had come to see the movie. And if I thought I was happy after having seen it, they were ecstatic. That it was a
Awesome.
very, very interesting way to see the film. And while I do have certain problems with the film itself in regards to script and just a couple of relatively nitpicky things, for the most part, I was satisfied with what they put up there and what they managed to accomplish in regards to staying true to a character that has changed so much since its initial inception. When they say, "Hey, we're going to do a Godzilla movie," you have to go wonder, well, which Godzilla are they doing?
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
So I mean, now that everyone knows how we feel about it, they've all either gotten angry or left. But excuse me. But basically, there were things in there that surprised me. For example, in a traditional Godzilla film, there is always a little kid with a baseball cap on and wearing ridiculously short pants. I mean, just embarrassingly short shorts.
Oh, yes.
And they managed to put that character into the film. And I thought it was a very clever way they did it. The only gripe that I really have about this film is while they still had the lab, at the nuclear power plant, they had the control room with ridiculous gauges and lights and all that other stuff that almost always appears to be in a Godzilla film. And the rampant destruction and the new monster. I remember, everyone seems to be complaining that Godzilla isn't in this enough. Go back and watch a Godzilla movie.
Exactly.
In almost every Godzilla movie, it starts with no Godzilla for a very long time, and then what they focus on is the new monster that shows up and starts wrecking shit. And then the military comes up with a misguided plan that is guaranteed not to work, and then doesn't work, and then Godzilla saves everyone.
Yeah.
And that's what happens in this film.
There was I think the night that I saw the movie, or maybe the day after, my wife was reading our local newspaper, which I don't usually do on my own because
I don't blame you.
Our local newspaper is horrible. It's an embarrassment. But there was a movie review of Godzilla in there, and it wasn't like a reprint of like an AP review. It was a locally written review, and it made me so angry because. Not because, look, if you didn't like the movie, that's cool. You're allowed to not like the movie. But
No.
this reviewer was like, there's not enough Godzilla. It's too slow for the first hour until Godzilla shows up. Mm-hmm. Which, again, if that's how you feel, that's fine. But he seemed to think that it was for budgeting reasons. Like they couldn't, like he was like, if they couldn't afford to show us Godzilla, then they shouldn't have made a Godzilla movie. I was like, can you not tell that it's an artistic choice, that they didn't show you a lot of Godzilla on purpose? It's called building suspense. It's called building tension. And as you pointed out correctly, it's the template for pretty much every Godzilla movie ever made.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot
of people say, I just want monsters hitting each other. And my initial reaction to that is, no, you don't. You really don't. You don't want 2 hours of monsters hitting each other. That's not a fun recipe for a movie. That's fun for 15 to 20 minutes, which, by the way, is about how long Godzilla is fighting in this film.
Right.
That's, of course, this is my own personal opinion, and if you just wanted things hitting each other, that's fine. But boy, does that just sound like a slog in a movie theater, is to watch something like that. I think sometimes people ask for things that they don't really want, because if they ever got them, if this was 2 hours of Godzilla fighting, they would be complaining that it was just 2 hours of Godzilla fighting.
Exactly.
Now, go ahead.
Well, there's what I think what people fail to realize is if you're talking about making a 90-minute or a 2-hour movie of just monsters fighting, then basically your movie doesn't have a story. And it's really hard to carry off a feature-length movie that just has no story at all.
How do you write a story arc for Godzilla?
Right.
For the actual character of Godzilla.
And see the fights themselves. One of the things I like about the fight in this movie and the fights in most Godzilla movies is that they do have story arcs, but they're very, very simple. It's Godzilla gets beaten up, Godzilla comes back, Godzilla wins. It's a very simple story. And you can pull it off in a 15-minute fight, but you can't do 2 hours of that.
Right. I kind of likened it to, and you'll appreciate this, a wrestling match.
Exactly.
In a wrestling match, it is broken up into beats. There's a point in which the hero has been knocked down and is down, seemingly down for the count, thrown from the ring or whatever else, or there's two or three wrestlers on top of him, and then he breaks free from that, takes out his enemies, and is triumphant at the end.
Exactly.
Now, if that wrestling match was 2 hours long, I don't think wrestling would be nearly as popular.
No, no, and again, that template, the template not just for the whole plot of this movie, but also for the Godzilla action, it's very, very faithful to the classic Toho films. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the pleasures of the movie is you can tell, unlike the 1998 version that everybody despises, you can tell that the people who made this movie, they're educated on the source material. They know about Godzilla. They have great affection for it. And like you mentioned with the little boy with the baseball cap, they fit little things like that in. They fit other tropes from other disaster movies.
There were fighter jets in this. There were no fighter jets. There were, battleships and lots of shots at sea, and there were nods, but they weren't like, hey, look at this, wink. See what we're doing?
Yeah.
We're doing fan service. Get it? It wasn't anything like that. It was like they took the source material and incorporated it in a logical way, so that it would work in with the film.
Yeah, and one of the joys of it was that because I knew very little about it going in, other than
me too. I didn't.
I
stayed away from any. If someone was talking about it, I kind of stayed away. I wanted it to be a surprise.
Yeah, me too. I don't usually go out of my way to do that. Usually, if I happen to encounter a spoiler before I see a movie, it's not really that big of a deal to me. But for whatever reason, I just avoided learning about this movie. So all I knew was Godzilla going in. And I loved the fact that it wasn't a remake of the original Godzilla movie or like a Godzilla origin story. It has much more in common structurally and in terms of its tone with one of the later Godzilla movies than it does with that first one. And that was kind of a surprise, and like a good surprise. There's a wonderful fake out when the first monster is revealed. That all that business going on under the nuclear reactor. I'm like, okay, well, that's going to be Godzilla, and it's not Godzilla.
No,
Godzilla's like in the ocean somewhere. When that happens, and you realize, oh shit, there's going to be other monsters in this thing. And
not just one monster, but two goddamn monsters, and one of them flies.
Yes, yeah, and that was a great moment of realization when I was watching the movie. Like, oh, they're gonna do like a Godzilla fights things movie. Oh, this is gonna be great. You know?
And one of the things I kind of likened it, and I think this may be a stretch. The human characters in the film. Ford Brody is the guy who plays Kick-Ass. I don't know his name, but that's the character's name. It's Ford Brody. Cranston plays Joe Brody, and this kind of reminded me a little bit of Jaws in a weird way.
I think that was probably intentional. I mean,
you have the father figure who's kind of like, there's something there, and no one's listening to me, and why are you covering this thing up? And there's it's a long time before you ever get the big reveal of Godzilla. Whenever I hear people saying, I want Godzilla in this movie more, I think, well, did you want the mechanical shark every second of Jaws? Was it disappointing to you that Jaws, you didn't see the mechanical shark in the first attack at the very beginning of the movie? Because we don't actually see the full shark until the third act of that, halfway through the third act of Jaws. And, it's kind of like you just want all your cake. You can't have all your cake all the time.
Right. Yeah.
And I didn't have a... Yeah.
Well, the holding back of the shark in Jaws is, by most people who appreciate that film, is considered one of its great strengths. That's like the turn of genius in Jaws, is that it's a movie about a shark that you almost never see. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
That's the artful part of it.
Now, I will say this: Cranston was the strongest character in the movie, and for those of you who don't know, Cranston's character dies in the first act of the film. He's not in the movie from beginning to end, and a lot of people are upset and disappointed. Now, that's not the movie's fault. That is the people who advertised this film. They knew that Cranston was very popular in the United States, so they were going to put him front and center when it came to the previews, and that, I believe, was a disservice to fans who really expected him to be the main character. He's not the main character in the film. It's his son, Ford. I would have gladly traded Ford in for the father figure instead. I felt that that relationship was handled well. I thought Cranston did a great job. It's just a line under overacting in that movie for him. Just a line. But what he gave us and what we were exposed to, I liked that character, and I wanted to see him. I would have liked to have seen him to the end of the film.
Yeah.
But just because I didn't get that doesn't mean that I'm angry about it.
Oh no, and we can hypothesize about how the movie could have been better, and obviously I would have. If I were directing it, I would have found a way to include that Bryan Cranston character. I would have made that my protagonist. I would have made that my point of view character, and found some other way of fitting him in with the army stuff and all that. Because it's obviously a lot easier. Look, his son just happens to be a bomb disposal specialist in the Navy, so it's easy to fit him in with the military stuff and have him right there. And it would have taken a bit more creativity to insert the Bryan Cranston engineer character in there, but you could have done it somehow, I think. But yeah, it doesn't ruin the movie for me. And really having Cranston there, and he is such a good actor, and he commits himself to this material to a really impressive degree. And that helps bring the movie along, because in this movie, as in all Godzilla movies, the function of the human characters essentially is to just kill time until it's time for the big monster fight. They're there to give you something to watch while the movie is holding off on the monsters. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's just a part of the way a Godzilla movie is structured, and it's been that way since the first one. And
one of my favorite scenes is the train scene where they have to get off and they're walking across that the train bridge. Because number one, they managed to make a 20-story, 30-story tall monster scary as a monster in the dark, and they put it in a place. Because how are you going to make a monster surprise you? How is a monster that big going to suddenly appear? And they managed to pull it off with that scene. They managed to convey a sense of personal fear in regards to the Mutos, specifically in that scene. And that really felt it was a very Spielbergian kind of feel to that entire train sequence, where they're not only are we having to worry about them falling through the rungs of the train tracks, but now they're being circled by something that could very easily just kill them.
That's true. It is that sequence does have a lot of Spielberg influence to it. I think about it so much in terms of other Godzilla movies, but yeah, it definitely has some other influences. And one of the other things I enjoyed about it was the way I feel like the movie is smart enough that I can give it credit for this and not chalk it up to just laziness. It includes other sort of disaster movie tropes.
Yeah,
but in a way that
feels very much disaster. I've heard this thrown around. It very much is disaster porn. In some respects.
I had that thought, and I was thinking about this movie, because one of my major criticisms of last year's Superman movie was, and still is, that it was disaster porn. And I didn't feel that way about Godzilla. I mean, I can acknowledge that there was a lot of destruction, and the destruction was used, for entertainment value. Yeah. Which is, what else are you going to call it but disaster porn?
I think the problem with Man of Steel was that it was needless, and this was necessary to the plot. I mean, that's what these things will do if they enter a populated area. They gave the Mutos a reason to enter populated areas as well.
Right, they're after the radiation, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I would have to say that disaster porn is destruction that has no consequence. That doesn't have a human toll added to it. This has human toll. You know, when in Man of Steel, when they were destroying Metropolis, you really didn't have a whole lot of cutscenes onto the ground as to what was happening to the people as they were fighting. This had a lot of cutaways. The Honolulu sequence is almost all told from the perspective of a person on the ground.
Yeah. And the destruction in this movie, even though while it's happening, while Godzilla and the Mutos are fighting, you're sitting in the theater going, "Oh my God, this is so awesome!" Within the context of the story of the film, it's depicted as this horrible thing, as like a disaster that everybody get out of here. Whereas in Man of Steel, I really get the impression that we're just supposed to think it's cool, and just not even worry about what's going on in the ground.
Right.
And as other people have pointed out too, I mean, Godzilla is a monster. He has no responsibility to guard human life. Like he doesn't have to care.
Do you think he was? Based on what we saw in the film, because you know he has his lie down, and then he just leaves. He doesn't go after anybody or anything. It's not like he grabs a handful of people on his way out.
No.
He just kind of, after all the fighting's over with. Oh, by the way, everyone, he wins. When he's on his way out, he just leaves. We're kind of incidental, you know.
Right.
To his surroundings. He doesn't harbor... Actually, none of the Mutos really harbored a grudge against people. They were just doing what they were doing.
Yeah, I think that's the way the movie gets away with it. Go ahead.
Until the end, when Ford Brody realizes that he's managed to piss off something that is about 5 million times his own size. That very last scene right before the epic slaughter of that Muto.
Oh, yes. Yes, I know what you mean.
I figure in 3D it was actually kind of impressive when it's leaning down towards him, and all he has is his little 45.
Yeah, yeah.
But I can't even remember where I was going because all of a sudden I remember that scene and I'm really happy again.
Yeah, I know that's not.
Oh, what I was going to say was, you know, I wanted to bring this up. The original Godzilla, the first Godzilla, was very much heavily influenced by what Japan had gone through during World War II. Mm-hmm. His original origin was that he was freed from an ice flow by a nuclear explosion, and that's what powers him and basically made him grow and all that other stuff. In this one, everyone keeps complaining about how there aren't other themes in there, and there is a very specific 2 things that they put in this film that are very specifically related to Japan, that are very recent and more than likely front and center in their, in that country's psyche. The movie begins with the destruction of a nuclear power plant in Japan.
Right.
And the second act of the film features a tsunami, or a tidal wave that flows through Honolulu. That's not by coincidence. That is just, they didn't write the script and go, "Oh man, Fukushima happened, and now we got to take it out." That was I felt was done on purpose. I was actually kind of surprised that they were in there, to be quite honest, because I have not heard anyone say, "Oh, how dare you! These things are fresh disasters in Japan." I haven't heard that shouted out. I think they were both handled fairly. I think that they've both been handled fairly well. They were both handled fairly well, but it was kind of a callback to the original Godzilla. They basically took fears and concerns that they had with Japan specifically back in 1954, and they kind of did the same thing and still managed to make Japan the primary focus.
When you compare this film to the Roland Emmerich one, the 1998 one, which made, I feel, the really stupid mistake of just lifting Godzilla completely out of the Japanese context.
Well, Roland Emmerich said he made a vested effort to completely. He said, "I want to completely change Godzilla from top to bottom." He did that, and what he made wasn't a Godzilla film.
Right, and what it wasn't particularly accomplished, whether it was Godzilla or not. And But yeah, this film finds a way of I mean, it's a movie. It's an American movie. It's pitched primarily at an American audience.
Hmm.
So the money shot is in the United States. The big fight doesn't happen in Tokyo as it would have in a classic Godzilla movie. It happens in San Francisco. But they still find a way to structure the film so that Godzilla and at least one of the other of the enemy monsters is tied very closely to Japan. The main characters have ties to Japan. Bryan Cranston lives and works in Japan. His
Yeah.
son grew up in Japan. So there's a very close ties to Japan, and it feels appropriate. I mean, it wouldn't feel right if you did a King Kong movie that took place in Portland. You know, you can't do a Godzilla movie that doesn't have ties to Japan. It's where the character was born. It has those echoes of Hiroshima in his origin,
Right.
and it's just you just can't do Godzilla without Japan. And I thought that the way they tied in the Fukushima disaster and the way they tied in the earthquake and the tidal wave, I thought it worked very well. It was a really smart way of doing that without beating you over the head with it. And I really liked the way the monsters were connected in subtle ways, in visual ways, to natural forces. I
Yeah.
felt that it gave them more of an elemental feeling. It made them feel more impressive and more dangerous. When Godzilla is swimming through the ocean, you know, he's pushing battleships aside. You know, he's this massive force. He displaces water in a huge volume. The coming of the monsters is sort of prefaced by earthquakes
By
and tidal
earthquakes.
waves.
Yeah.
You know, they're natural forces. They feel like very elemental and ancient, and
It's
it works
also
really well.
reflected in Ken Watanabe's character's name. I can't remember his name. Japanese scientist man.
Oh
Um,
yeah, Sarazawa.
yeah, he alludes to the fact that Godzilla is a natural balance.
Yeah,
That if these guys pop up, he shows up, knocks them back down again, and then goes away. And I felt that was, very smart. It was a smart way to tackle the creature. It didn't over-explain him. It didn't
right.
go out of its way to over-explain what was going on. It never treated us. It never treated the audience like we were dumb. Here's the best example. If this had been done by Michael Bay, there would have been a scene in which the kid, the soldier son of Bryan Cranston's character. Here's a basic setup. 19 years ago, the power plant is destroyed. Cranston loses his wife, and I think it was 19 years. Maybe not. I may have been adding too many
Something
years
like
to it.
maybe
Something like
15
that.
years, something like that.
He spent the remaining time trying to figure out what actually happened while being roadblocked by the government. And he's convinced that something else was going on during the incident that took his wife. He's kind of become a little crazy, which you can tell by newspaper clippings on the wall. Everyone knows that when you put newspaper
Yeah.
clippings on your wall, you've gone nuts. His son is estranged from him because of how driven and focused his father is. He's carrying a huge amount of guilt over the death of his wife. If this had been handled by Michael Bay, there would have been a scene at some point in which a general or a scientist would have said, your father was a great man. And he would have had some idiotic, either a monologue or something. He would have been talking to his lap while his wife listened about how he never believed in his father. They managed to convey those things through the acting that they had in those scenes. There's a scene with Cranston in his little hut and his son, who is done. He's done with his father's nuttiness.
Yeah.
And they don't bash you over the head with what's going on. They hope that you have the brains to understand that Cranston even knows that he's gone too far. That he has a grandchild that he's never met.
Right.
Who's like, what, 7 or 8 years old?
Right.
Because he's that driven. And the son is like, I can't do this anymore. I haven't been doing it. And it was not ham-handed. And I keep hearing all these people saying, oh, none of the characters are interesting, and it was really boring, and oh, they were dead-eyed, and the monsters were more interesting. And it's kind of like, what do you people want? I will admit that one of the things the script did need desperately was a sense of humor. It needed some levity. Someone needed to go back through the script for Punch Up and just add some humor to some character somewhere. They had the actors that would be able to pull it off. Because I remember after leaving the theater, it was kind of like, wow, that I love the movie, but it's kind of dour. It's just it's kind of, everyone is so scared and serious all the time. I didn't want a humorous sidekick. I would have killed myself if there had been a funny sidekick. But I just needed someone somewhere to make some kind of joke. Yeah, I would have loved it if David Strathairn just had to stop himself halfway through his speech going, I really can't believe I'm sending you guys out to stop a giant lizard.
Yeah.
None of us have trained for this.
I thought, speaking of the David Strathairn character, there's a scene during one of the many scenes of him on the battleship when he's sort of walking in to get briefed by his staff and they're monitoring the situation, and he says they let him know where the Mutos are, and then he says, "Where's Godzilla?" And I think it's the first time in the movie that the word Godzilla has been spoken. Ken Watanabe's character has said Gojira.
Yeah, we called him Gojira.
Yeah, but we haven't heard Godzilla, and so the admiral played by David Strathairn says, "Where's Godzilla?" And I thought, oh wow, so they're just calling him Godzilla now. Like, and I think of like this professional, lifetime soldier just making that adjustment very quickly.
Yeah, just like, I only half heard what you said.
Yeah,
sorry.
Okay, it's called Godzilla, whatever. But yeah, until the monsters showed up, and really, especially before Godzilla really became a factor, I had the thought watching the movie of, man, this is so serious, and played so straight, and not just serious in terms of the lack of humor, but the way it's shot. I mean, it's really shot and presented and acted as a really serious movie.
Yes.
And I thought, man, how's this going to work when the giant monsters show up and this becomes just a bunch of schlock? and it actually worked. And I think it actually worked fairly well. But I think probably just because in that moment, the monsters are so well done and the fight is so fun and so exhilarating that it just pulls you through. If you go back and look at it and kind of dice the movie up and try to look at it critically, it is really, really serious for that first hour or so. I mean, there's a lot of really heavy stuff going on. Like, people are dying, they're dealing with the loss of family members. There's natural disasters that are threatening civilization. There's really heavy stuff going on, and it's handled in a really straight way, not in like a cheesy sort of adventurous way. And maybe that could have been lightened up a little bit.
I mean, even once again, I'm going to use Jaws because it's the greatest movie ever made. I'm just going to use Jaws. Jaws still had a sense of humor about it. It knew how to write a script. There are plenty of scenes between, say, Brody and Hooper where the audience is nervous. When Hooper's about to go diving out into the water to go find Ben Gardner's boat, everyone in the theater is terrified that shark is going to just jump up onto their boat and eat both of them at the same time. And they are managing to interject little pieces of dialogue that are humorous and kind of they break that tension a little bit. This movie kind of needed that to break the tension in certain places so that people could feel okay to breathe. Now, one of the other things I want to bring up is a lot of people said there's a lot of coincidences in this movie, and I will agree, there are a lot of coincidences in this movie, specifically with the main character, Ford Brody.
Ford, yeah.
Because he happens to be the guy who knows how to do the thing, and he's in the right place at the right time, and I guess he's the only bomb disposal expert in the Navy.
In the world, apparently.
In the world. And that Godzilla seems to be following him wherever he goes.
Yeah.
But here's something I just want to say as far as coincidences go. The tram that is destroyed in Honolulu, I've been on. I've been on that tram. I've been through that airport. Lots of people have. But then it was like Godzilla was following me around because the final fight is in my hometown. I work in Oakland. I lived in San Francisco for 17 years, and when you hear someone say, "Quick, get to a BART station, they're acting as shelters," it kind of jars you a little bit. So
Yeah,
if we
sure.
follow the same coincidence thing, I have coincidences with the plots of this as well. Movies have to do things to keep their main characters involved with the central storyline.
Exactly.
That's why they
And
split up R2D2 and C3PO. That's why one of the droids goes off with one of the groups in those original films, was because they felt that they didn't want them together the entire time. They wanted people like both characters there and follow both characters around.
right.
And also I think they wanted to keep the cast to a certain number of people that we were paying attention to, not a gigantic cast of like, oh, we're going to open up this other storyline about a Chinese family in San Francisco and their interpersonal drama and how Godzilla just comes in and destroys. Other movies have tried to do that, and they've just made big messes.
Yeah.
Out of
A movie like this works the best when it has a single protagonist, and the way that the number one job of a filmmaker, of a director, of a writer, I think, is to get the audience to care about what happens to that protagonist.
Yeah.
And sometimes they have to take shortcuts. Sometimes they have to script it in such a way, plot it in such a way that it's, if you think about it, you're like, wait a minute, well, he just happened to be on that train at the exact moment. That kid just happened to get separated from his parents, you know. And but the thing is, most of the people making that criticism probably love a movie that has those exact same faults, and for whatever reason, they don't feel conscious of it, because that movie pulls them along and carries them through it. And for me, this Godzilla movie did that for me. I mean, there were times when I was watching it that I recognized that that's what was happening. Oh, he just so happens to be on the train. You know, he just so happens to be a bomb disposal expert. He just so happens to live in the city with a wife and a child where Godzilla's going to fight. You know, I see that stuff going on. I've watched movies all my life. I've written movies. I've critically analyzed movies. I see that stuff going on. I know exactly what it's doing. But I don't care, because the movie is pulling me along.
And I think, you know what, if they had added, and I will say this, if they had added a little bit more of a sense of humor, people wouldn't have minded as much. I mean, look at Independence Day, for the love of God. That one is filled with so many coincidences of people who know each other. It got even more, I mean, this is a horrible movie, but 2012 has a single character who has more coincidental relationships with people than as near as I could tell, he's either Jesus or some kind of deity to have the connections that he needed to have in order to survive to the end of that film.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about it's another kind of I think another kind of criticism that people had with the film, and it just left my head. I was thinking about it just a second ago, and I cannot remember for the life of me what it is. Damn it! I think we covered everything.
Well, there was something that I thought about that, I mean, we kind of covered it a little bit when we talked about Bryan Cranston and how it feels like they had this incredible actor involved in the movie, and why not just keep that character around? Why focus on Ford, who might be more convenient for the plot, but let's face it, isn't played by as charismatic of an actor and just isn't as interesting of a character.
Yeah, and he's not a bad actor. I've seen him in other things. He has a range. I've heard interviews with him in which he wants to emulate Gary Oldman's character, which I think Gary Oldman as an actor, who also went out of his way to model himself after Alec Guinness. And we're talking about someone who wants to be a professional character actor, not hunky matinee idol kind of actor.
Yeah, he's not a bad actor, and he does the best with what he has here. They just chose to make him just a relatively bland character.
He has nothing there that speaks to who he is, other than at the very beginning where he's just frustrated.
Yeah, and there's the similar criticism I would make would be with the use of Elizabeth Olsen and her character, because I've seen her in stuff. Yeah, Elle. I've seen her in stuff. She's a terrific actress.
Yes.
And she's in this movie, and you know, she's basically only she does nothing. She's just there to remind us that she's in jeopardy so that we
Although
remind, so that we know that Ford has like some stakes in this.
I will commend her for acting like a parent, because
Yes,
she put her kid on that bus and got him out of the city.
yes,
And you know how many times if this was a different movie, that kid would have snuck out of the bus and they
yeah,
surprised his mother and said, "Mom, I just wanted to stay with you," and then put the child in jeopardy. They still put the child in jeopardy, but in a different way.
right,
Um, but she put him on. She didn't even really think about it. She was like, "Get him on the bus. Get him on the bus. Get him out of here. I need to go back
right.
and do my nurse things." But aside from that, she really didn't have any other need to be in the film other than this is what Ford is getting back to save his wife and to
Right.
save his kid.
And it was a shame, and I'm getting a little close here to bringing things in from outside the movie, which I don't like to do
Yeah.
when I criticize a movie. But when you look at I've been watching some of the older Godzilla movies because I think I'm going to do some movie reviews on my YouTube channel the
Cool.
next week or so, for some old Gods, because I'm just like in a Godzilla frame of mind now.
Yeah.
And I've been watching some of the older ones from the '60s,
Mhm.
and surprisingly, I didn't really remember this from watching them as a kid, but there are some really strong female characters in
Oh
those,
yeah.
uh, and not just like one token female character, but like two, three, four very visible, very important female characters in human characters in these films. So there is sort of a tradition in the Godzilla franchise of having strong, empowered female characters as part of the human cast, and this movie didn't really do that.
No, it didn't.
And it doesn't ruin the movie. It's not something that I think like, I can't possibly like this movie because it didn't have enough female characters. But when you think about it, it wouldn't have been that difficult to do. And I even suggested to my wife when we were talking about it afterwards, why not just swap the sex of the characters? Why not just put the Elizabeth Olsen character in the Ford role? Just have a female protagonist. Just have Bryan Cranston has a daughter instead of a son, and keep everything else relatively the same. And it wouldn't really have changed the movie all that much.
Yeah, they could have made it a daughter, and they could have kept Cranston's character back in San Francisco arguing with something, and it could have been him trying to get back to, or her trying to get back to a father that she felt at this point she had misjudged. That would have been a stronger, I need to get back to them and let them know that I'm sorry for thinking that you were a crackpot, no matter how justified I was in thinking that.
Right. Yes, I mean, and we're getting into rewriting the movie, but I mean, it's just something that it makes the movie feel, for as skillful as it was, and as much as I enjoyed it so much, and as well executed as it was, it's probably on a technical level and just in terms of its smarts and its pacing and its editing and everything, it's probably the best executed Godzilla movie that's ever been made. I mean, it takes those basic elements of the classic Toho Godzilla movies and recreates them and just executes them with such skill. But that's just something that makes it feel a little bit old-fashioned, the way the female characters are used.
Yeah. The other thing that this movie did, what I was counting on was the things that I was noticing are the things that it was not doing. The things that it did not do, which I'm glad that it didn't do. For example, no humorous sidekick.
Yeah.
No comical fellow scientist. There was not the science. Yeah, no comical. These are things that you saw in Godzilla films. Thank God our main character. I mean, people are complaining about Ford, but they could have made him the little kid in the short shorts and the hat.
Oh, very much.
We could have had a child as a main character in this film very easily, and I think I probably would have ripped my eyes out if that had occurred.
Very much.
One of the problems that I did have, and this was strictly in the 3D, it was the way some of the shots were framed, where there was stuff going on in the background, and they had characters in the foreground, and I literally found myself doing this because stuff was happening between me and the characters on the screen. And granted, it's very effective if you want to give someone a feeling that they're actually there because you want to look around the person to see what's going on. But I can't actually do that, so all I have is a very annoying effect of not being able to see what the hell I wanted to see. And I can understand that there are some people who are complaining about the cutaways for the fights at the beginning, where the airport fight specifically, when Godzilla finally does show up, they cut away and they show him fighting on television.
Yeah.
That served a number of purposes. Number one, most people have never seen a traditional Godzilla film on the big screen. The only Godzilla film that I've ever seen on the big screen was Godzilla 2000 when it came out in 2000.
I saw that one too. I saw that one as well. Yeah.
By the way, my favorite scene is when the other monster has gotten him, is partially swallowed Godzilla, and then when you see his back ridge flare up, and you're like, oh, he's gonna, and then he blows the monster's back out.
I know. Yeah.
I will say this much: any movie that makes me so giddy as seeing a giant reptile's spine crest begin to light up earned my money.
Oh, absolutely.
I spent $15.75 on this movie. I don't do that normally. And I did not think that I would have such a giddy, childlike reaction to a lot of... And let's talk about the fight. The fight at the end was what everyone was wanting and was everyone was waiting for, and they gave you just enough to want more. They gave you just enough to go, okay, if a sequel's coming, and if he's fucking fighting Rodan, I will live at the theater.
Exactly. But yeah, it was you could tell that Gareth Edwards, the director, has done his homework for Godzilla, or perhaps is a longtime fan, and he knows what a Godzilla fight looks like from the old Toho films. And yeah, it's difficult for me to imagine. I know apparently there are some, but it's difficult for me to imagine someone who grew up loving Godzilla not loving at least the last act of this movie.
Oh, I think universally a lot of people are saying that the last act is what is very satisfying.
Yeah, it's just so well done.
It's only satisfying because of what you got. You know, if they had made it longer than that, you would have gotten tired of it. You know, there's no battle scene in any of the original Star Wars films that last half the movie. Or the fight scenes in Star Wars are what a lot of people remember, and they're relatively short and connected to the storyline. This scene, which is the money scene, this is the money shot of the scene, they don't disappoint at all in regards to...
No, and I think one of the reasons why some people are complaining about the pacing or the lack of Godzilla or the briefness of the fights is that I think we're about 10 years or so into this era of popular Hollywood cinema where it's been dominated by the Michael Bay influenced stuff. And there have been exceptions to that. For the most part, the Marvel films and the Nolan Batman films have sort of bucked that trend. But for the most part, we're used to these blockbusters that just throw everything at us. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, especially in a popular audience who maybe aren't film aficionados, aren't used to watching a movie, especially a big blockbuster summer movie that is shot and told with restraint. Mm-hmm. And this movie is told with restraint and with sort of an artful eye. That's why you only get little glimpses of the Godzilla fights until the very end. That's why they cut away. That's why the view is obscured. This actually has one of my favorite uses of framing, and probably one of the more effective things is, and this is the very last shot of this film, which ends exactly the way every Godzilla film ends. He goes back out to the sea, people are watching him go, and when he goes out into the water, his fins disappear underneath it, and they just show calm, and they hold on it just that long for you to go, it's like he was never even here. It's just like this kind of like, it ended it so perfectly and with such a stillness, and like, I don't know if you've ever been in a traumatic situation where something, there was a moment where I wasn't paying attention on Bart, and I was standing a little too close to the platform. When something really big goes past you, all of it at once, you get that shot of adrenaline. You wake up, and then as soon as you know that you're okay, you suddenly go glacially calm. Yeah.
And that's what that felt like. That kind of stillness. Roland Emmerich Michael Bay and a lot of these other guys who treat us like idiots, who hammer away things, who write overdramatic scripts, who create complexity for complexity's sake.
Yeah.
That makes no sense. They never would have had a shot like that in any of their films at any point.
No, and they certainly wouldn't have ended on it.
No, they wouldn't have.
And that's something that I really admire about Gareth Edwards, the director of this film, is that he ends on the perfect shot, and I'm a sucker for that in any movie. I think that's a really important. The two most important shots in a film are the first shot and the last shot, and that last shot should mean something. You shouldn't just end it on some random old shot. You should, and the last shot of this movie is Godzilla sort of going back under the water, and then there's that hold, and then the abrupt cut straight to the credits. There's no epilogue. You don't see the characters like back in their home a week later. None of that. It's over.
Or like, cheering. That would have been the other one. Is just cheering. There was cheering at the end of this, but it ended quietly and kind of
it didn't end on the cheering.
Yeah, exactly. Now you mentioned the director. Did you see Monsters?
No, I haven't. I mean to see it. I wanted to see it a few months ago. I heard something about it.
I believe it's on Netflix. You can probably see it there.
I'm gonna make a point to watch it, but I haven't seen it yet.
It's not. A lot of people complained about Monsters because they heard, oh, it's a monster movie, and it was made for $20,000. It is a monster movie, but what it really is a relationship film framed in a monster movie type setting. So a lot of people went in expecting one kind of film and came out going, all I heard about were these people and this stupid relationship and blah, blah, blah. And they kind of missed the point of the film. Yeah. And I loved it. And when I found out that he was heading Godzilla, I went, oh, so someone is actually taking this property seriously, or they wouldn't have thrown money to the guy who only made one film for $20,000 on his laptop. Right. Considering that this is his, I think, this is his sophomore effort, this is a great movie. Absolutely. It makes me wonder, because of the pace, you know what, you're right, a lot of the pacing, a lot of the stuff, this is a kind of film that we have not seen in a very long time, a movie that has a certain amount of restraint to it. If we took Jaws and showed it now, no one had ever seen it, no one had ever heard of it, no one had ever, people would say, you didn't see the shark until the end, I don't understand why he kept going on in the water, why didn't they shut the beaches down, the characters are two-dimensional, and, there would have been a whole lot of stuff. People would have gotten bored waiting around for something to happen. And I kind of really appreciated that. I really appreciated the fact that it did have a slow build. And you did see Godzilla. You just didn't see all of Godzilla all at once. I laughed out loud when they cut to the shot of Godzilla swimming through the ocean and there are battleships just tailing right behind
alongside him. Yeah, I love that.
And then he just loses him. He swims off and he goes, "Where's Godzilla going?" We don't know, but he's going really fast. I appreciated the slow build too. And again, it's something. I mean, even in modern blockbuster movies that are relatively well received critically, like Batman Begins, which I'm not a huge fan of, but was a huge hit and was a very, very well appreciated critically when it came out. You really kind of do get Batman pretty quick in that movie. I mean, it kind of rushes through the origin part. He gets in that bat suit by about the 30-40 minute mark, and in this one, in Godzilla, it makes you wait a long time, and then when Godzilla does show up, you just get little glimpses of him. And I found that tantalizing. I felt like I was being teased, like in a good way, in a good way, to build suspense, to build anticipation, and that. Like you were saying about people who maybe complain about the movie Monsters because it doesn't have enough monsters in it. If you complain about this Godzilla movie because it doesn't have enough Godzilla, I mean, you're entitled to your opinion. You can dislike the movie for whatever reason you want, but you're missing the point of what the movie is. You're wanting to just see a different movie. Yeah, they want Pacific Rim 2. And they're never going to get Pacific Rim 2, and this is my final point. Movie makers need to ignore nerds and what nerds claim they want. because Pacific Rim was a movie that nerds claimed they wanted, they listened, a lot of people really wanted the film. I had a passing interest in it,
Hmm.
but the movie industry made the mistake of thinking that what nerds want, everyone else wants.
Right.
Pacific Rim is a good example of that. The movie came out, it didn't do that well. It may have done well internationally, and that's great, but here in the United States, it kind of came into the theaters and it kind of left. I'm indifferent about the film, about Pacific Rim.
Hmm.
But I could definitely see that there was a lot of fan service paid to not only to the plot, but to the general surroundings. It made a lot of fanboys really, really happy. But it didn't play to a broad audience of people. And when movies are spending this much money on a story, they need to make sure that their film appeals to a wide audience of people. Now, if you took a 6-year-old to see this Godzilla, he's going to get bored out of his mind.
Yeah.
Up until about, I would have to say, when the first Muto hatches. I would have to say that's what, a half hour into the film. I would have to say half hour, maybe a little bit more.
I think that's sort of the plot point at the end of the first act.
Mm-hmm. And not to say nerd culture has driven the movie industry for better or worse right now, but the things that have been successful are the people who appreciate fandom but kind of ignore it and instead pay tribute to source material. They go, okay, I know what the fans want, but here's what the source material dictates. So we're going to kind of follow closely on that. That's what they did with this film. They paid attention to the source material, and that's why I'm not disappointed. And I've loved Godzilla for as long as I have memory. And
yeah, me too.
And and it's not a memory of just the Godzilla fights. It's a memory of sitting with my dad, watching movies on a Sunday when a Godzilla film would come on, sitting through the first hour and a half of that movie of scientists going, well, perhaps if we lure him with this substance, then we can hit him with our giant Alka-Seltzer and it will dissolve him away.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I'll tell you,
go ahead.
One more quick thing about this movie that I have to get this in because we mentioned the Ken Watanabe character a little bit earlier. There are two things I loved about that character. First, I noticed that the nationality of the cast of this movie is almost an exact inversion of the nationality of the cast of the original Godzilla movie, the American version of the original Godzilla movie. Which was all Japanese with Raymond Burr edited in there as the American guy.
Yeah, edited in some set. They say, "Hey Raymond, come into this box set and do all of your dialogue from here." And he's, "What am I looking at? Just read like the goddamn lines."
Yeah, just shut up. You want paid or not, Perry Mason. And this movie, it's all Americans and Europeans with one major Japanese character. Played by Ken Watanabe, and he has maybe my favorite line in the movie because you mentioned like traditionally the Japanese government and military in the Godzilla movies come up with all these schemes to defeat the monsters that never go anywhere, and Ken Watanabe's character he's not that guy. He's the guy who wants him to just get out of the way. Mm-hmm. And he says to David Strathairn's Admiral character at one point with a completely straight face and this tone of gravity in his voice. Mm-hmm. He says, "Let them fight." And I said to my wife afterwards, I said, I love the fact that there's this guy who's an admiral in the Navy whose job is to stop these monsters from killing millions of people. Right. And here's this scientist looking him right in the face and saying, "No, dude, you should just let the giant monsters fight."
No, it's just San Francisco. We can build another one after they're done.
Exactly.
By the way,
it was terrific.
Now that we're going to get to the nitpicky, funny parts of this movie, I didn't realize that we could make a clockwork nuke. I did not know that was possible. That we could do a manually operated wind-up nuke.
Yeah, it's pretty
that doesn't run on electricity. And by the way, six Navy SEAL team members could pick up and move around the city.
Yeah, and in relatively short order. Like they get to the harbor like within 5 minutes.
They just had it.
Yeah, that is pretty hilarious. Like, so it doesn't need any electricity at all?
No, we just had it lying around.
Yeah, and it's in perfect condition. They have this thing lying around. It's in perfect condition from like the 40s.
It's a pre-industrial nuke that we just happened to find.
And then of course I told my wife on the way home as well. We had a great conversation about this movie because she really liked it too, even though she doesn't have the Godzilla background.
Right.
And I said, I feel bad in modern movies, like modern action movies, disaster movies, whatever, because if one of the main characters, if his skill is that he's a bomb disposal guy,
Mm-hmm.
you know that he's going to fail at his job because you know that if there's a bomb introduced in one of these big movies, that bomb is going off.
No,
It might not go off. It won't go off like in the city or anything. Like the Tony Stark will throw it through the portal into the other side of the universe, or Batman will fly it out over the bay. But
we
that
need to
bomb's
stop
going off.
ending movies with nukes.
Yeah,
This is
like
the
that.
third movie that I can think of that ends with a nuke
With
potentially
a nuke
going
going
off.
off. Yeah. But I just the guy, and of course in this movie, even though the only reason Brody is there is because he's so amazing at defusing bombs, of course he can't get it open.
Well,
when
let's
he's
just be
supposed to
thankful
defuse
that
it.
his specialty was that and not that he was a poultry inspector or something equally as dumb.
Yes.
Because I would try to, we'll feed them poisoned poultry, and I know exactly where that warehouse is.
It's like, are you just saying that because that's your job? I get the feeling that won't actually work. You just want to contribute. I appreciate that, but I really don't think that's where we should go with this.
And the other thing was they kept on saying, we're going to lure the... Okay, the thing is, the Mutos feed off of nuclear radiation.
Yeah.
So they're going to lure them to San Francisco with a nuke, and they're going to come in, they're going to want to eat it, I can tell you right now, but between where the mother was out in the desert and San Francisco, there's got to be at least one nuclear, at least one test, launch site,
Yeah.
where we keep our missiles on the mainland. So she's going to ignore them just for the one nuke. And the other thing was, all of those aircraft carriers are nuclear powered. Every
Right.
single one of them. So why they never said, why don't we just park one of our nuclear powered vehicles? It can move on its own, and we got weapons on it. It'd be awesome. No. This is better. We're going to get the clockwork nuke.
Yeah, we're going to endanger the lives of millions of innocent people. It's going to be great.
And we're going to put the clockwork nuke on a boat. Well, what happens if the EMP goes off? The boat won't be able to go. Shut up.
Yeah. Hey, are you in on this or not? Because if you're not, you should just go.
Oh, by the way, I think that unless you haven't seen the film, the reason it has to be clockwork is because the Mutos give off an electromagnetic pulse, which knocks out all electricity. Now, I heard it said in a couple of reviews that Brody sets fire, destroys the eggs in San Francisco. And they say that's a good move because when you look at that, you see a lot of hatchlings in there, and if they all hatch, it's all over for us. And I really stopped to think about that for a second. I said, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to hatch, they're going to eat every nuclear weapon and shut down every nuclear power plant and not leave behind any residual radiation.
Right.
And then when it's all gone, they're going to bury themselves back underneath the ground, and we're going to be left with a radiation-free environment.
Yeah.
And
Thanks,
I was
Brody.
like, yeah, thanks, Brody. Granted, there'll be lots of collateral damage, and we'll have to figure out what to do without our nuclear weapons. Maybe, I don't know, have a more peaceful society. But I was like, the total damage that the Mutos would do, I don't know if it would be... were we only worried about losing our nuclear weapons? Because we see them eat the nukes like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
Hanging out of their mouths like stogies. They're not creatures that are eating people. That's one of the things I would have liked to have seen. I would have liked to have seen them eat a person. That would have made them a little bit more evil. They were more or less just animals.
Yeah. Well, and you could have justified it maybe because there were people shooting at them a lot.
Oh yeah, but they didn't.
You didn't have to make it like these giant monsters were like coming after us. They could could get pissed off and be like, hey.
Yeah.
Yeah,
knock it off.
Hey.
I said, stop it. What was it? The other thing I would have liked to have heard was the original Godzilla march, the music that was written. That's been in almost every Godzilla film except for '98. I would have liked to have heard it in this one. I'm not going to hate the film because it wasn't included, but I like that piece of music. And I was hoping that it would be in this, but what are you gonna do?
Yeah, I would have liked to hear that too because that is a very iconic theme. It would be, but I didn't mind it because I honestly, watching the movie, I didn't even think about it. You know, it's just like people complained about this about that in the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies. They said, well, the music's completely different. They don't use any of the old music themes in it, and that didn't bother me because I mean that's sort of the point of those movies is
Yeah.
to do it in a fresh way, not to rely on the old stuff.
Believe me, if you had nits to pick with the Star Trek, the Star Trek reboot, or whatever you want to call it, and it was the music that's the standout, boy, you've overlooked a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, everything else made complete sense, but the music.
Everything else if you really wanted to nitpick and be upset about something, those are the movies that I've met plenty of fans of Star Trek who are very upset about.
Those movies have ruined people's lives.
Marriages have ended. Children have left parents.
Oh yes, yeah, right. Because the husband thought it was cool, and the wife was like, "That's not Star Trek." And it was irreconcilable.
Okay, so to wrap up, yeah, I recommend this film. I enjoyed it. I will recommend it to anyone who is willing to allow a film to take its time to tell a story, and if you are willing to accept that, they're going to show you Godzilla in what is considered, as far as I'm concerned, fits in with the storyline, and if you're one of these people who like action from the very beginning and the very get-go, and super funny dialogue, and you wanted it to be more cheesy, and you wanted it to be more of a spoof, this may not be the movie for you. If you like to have something to chew on after you're done watching it, then this is a good movie. And I've had one of the reasons why we're doing this, calling it late seating, is it gives both of us enough time to get past all the hype, to get past the people who immediately go home after watching it and go, I hate this film, and they've not really invested any time into thinking about, other than their initial gut reaction. We're going to, hopefully we'll do, if you guys like this, we'll do another one. It looks like Steve wants to do another one. Do you have an idea?
I don't know. I mean, I've already seen the new X-Men movie.
Oh, you have? I haven't seen it yet. I can go see it. And we can arrange a date.
Okay. Well, that'd be a possibility. Or if you have a better idea. But I would love to do this regularly if we have enough interest.
If we have enough interest, I would love to do it on a regular basis. Unless people are really angry with us right now for our love of what appears to be a reviled and hated film on YouTube.
They're just a couple of Godzilla nerds. They don't even know what they're talking about.
And Steve, what's your final say on this?
I would echo what you said. I highly recommend it, especially if you have a history with Godzilla. If you remember loving Godzilla as a child, like I do, like Jason does, I highly recommend this movie. And just for people who aren't into Godzilla, it's a really well crafted blockbuster movie. It's beautiful. It's really well done. It's one of the most well done, skillfully executed blockbuster movies that I've seen in a while. So I would the problems we've talked about aside, I would recommend it.
Okay, well that's it. I made a promise that we'd try to keep these to about an hour. We're at an hour 8 minutes. Thanks to everyone who came in live to watch it. If you came in late, don't worry. I'm going to post this up onto my channel with a little editing. I'll throw an intro in there as well. If you guys have a recommendation for a movie that you would like us to see and review, go ahead and leave it down in the comment section, along with any other criticism, hatred, cuss words, whatever else. You can tell us we're full of shit. We don't care. This is all just opinion, guys.
We don't care.
Yeah, we don't. Our lives are not bound to how people think of our opinions on movies. Okay, I have a lot of very embarrassing favorite films that I will never say online because it'll just change people's opinion of me at that point.
Yeah, I've got a few of those.
But please feel free to comment in the comment section and let us know. It will just make the show better and feed our egos enough to spoil a perfectly good Sunday afternoon. Okay, but thanks for watching. Steve, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Until next time.
All right, bye-bye, everybody.